Hello, everyone. I'm really sorry. There was an issue with me accessing the room. I'm really sorry for this problem, but thank God all is handled. So I just want to welcome everyone today. My name is Rawan Nimri, and I'm a lecturer at the Department of Tourism, Sport and Hotel Management at Griffith University. Please allow me to welcome you all to our first session. Sorry for the hiccup with the access. And I would like also to thank our esteemed panel of senior academics and industry professionals who will be sharing their professional and experience and discuss their various career paths for PhD scholars and early career researchers, covering all the perspectives of academic positions, postdoc pathways, and industry opportunities. So on our panel today, we have Professor Brian King. Brian is a professor of tourism and the department chair designate at Texas A&M University, USA. He previously held professorships at Hong Kong Polytechnic University and at Victoria University in Australia. His recent teaching and research has focused on tourism and culture in Asia and on hospitality and tourism leadership. He has authored books on integrated resorts, tourism development, hospitality education, marketing, VFR travel, and Asia-Pacific tourism, and contributes extensively to leading tourism and hospitality journals. He is co-editor-in-chief and co-founder of Tourism, Culture, and Communication, and a fellow of the International Academy for the Study of Tourism and of Coffee. Brian will be focusing today on the academic career selection panel and the selection panel perspective. Our second panelist is Dr. Natasha Montesalvo, who is a principal consultant in destination strategy and insights in EarthCheck Australia. So Natasha joined EarthCheck, having spent 4 years leading the policy and research team for the peak body for tourism in Queensland. She has a strong understanding of the political systems that govern and shape the tourism industry and how they can strengthen or inhibit the industry's success. Natasha's work at EarthCheck focuses on destination resilience, risk management, and experience development. Natasha gained her PhD through Griffith University, and prior to postgraduate studies, she gained operational experience in luxury hotel groups in Australia and the UK, and spent time working across Europe for a major UK tour operator. Natasha today will be focusing on building a career path in the industry. Our third panelist today is Associate Professor Brent Moyle from the Department of Tourism, Sport and Hotel Management at Griffith University. Brent takes pride in conducting research at the interface between theory and practice, engaging extensively with industry partners to complete research with impact with an emphasis on remote regions. Brent has been the lead CI on over 20 externally funded projects and completed 3 postdoctoral fellowships prior to securing a permanent position at Griffith University. The outcomes of his research has culminated in excess of 90 journal articles, and he has supervised 8 doctoral students to completion. Brent today will be focusing on the postdoc pathway. Our fourth panelist is Dr. Jane Godfrey. She's a consultant in Martin Jenks in New Zealand. Jane completed her PhD from the UTS in 2016 and has been working as an evaluator in Wellington since 2014. She started as a consultant in the private sector before moving to central government, first at the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment, followed by 3 years at the Ministry of Transport, including being closely involved in New Zealand's COVID aviation response. She is currently a consultant at Martin Jenkins, where she conducts policy evaluation for a range of public sector clients, including New Zealand Police, Ministry for the Environment, Ministry for Social Development. Her PhD examined volunteer tourism in Peru. Jane will be focusing on building a career path in consultancy and government sectors. Just a few housekeeping rules. Each panel speaker will have 7 minutes. Following that, we will have time for Q&A. As we have a virtual morning tea at 10:30, we need to finish by then. I will gently remind each speaker when they have 1 minute left. So if you have any question, please use the chat function And I would encourage all the participants to add their questions as we go through the session today. Finally, we have a Padlet link where you can add your insights on today's sessions. So please, if you can share your experiences and views on this session during the session or following that, I will add the link to the chat box. So without further ado, I will be passing to Professor Brian.
Thank you, Rawan. I hope everyone is able to see my slides. I've got a backup if you can't. Can you see them? Can I be heard, and can we see the slides? I need to hear back.
Yes, Brian can see the slides and we can hear you.
Wonderful, thank you, Brent. Okay, well, good morning, everyone, and it's evening here in Texas. Wonderful to be with this panel, and lovely to be back in Kauthi, if not face to face. I am a Kauthi tragic. I've attended over 20 in my time face to face, but it's lovely to see you all. Now, in my 7 minutes, we don't have a lot of time. I'm going to take you on a whirlwind tour of my own experience and try to relate how that for you as PhDs and as early career researchers, it may or may not be relevant to you. My career has spanned different continents. I've been here in the US at Texas A&M University for about 5 weeks, very recent. Started off in Europe, both in the industry and also in a tourism school. Spent 25 years in Australia, many at Victoria University in Melbourne, but also with stints in the industry. I then moved to Hong Kong Polytechnic University for 9 years, and then finally in the US. So I want to just, in the course of my brief words, but then also in discussion, just give this idea that we are part of a very global sector. Brent will talk about the postdocs, but I'll talk about this more general academic with the teaching, research, service, and engagement, which has always been a part of my career. Now, in that career, and you can see there's me as the Scotsman on the left, I've had ups and downs. So as many people in their tourism academic careers, I've been a lecturer, I've been a subject coordinator, program coordinator, but I've also done head of department, acting dean. I've done other roles in universities, including as pro-vice chancellor. But after about 4 years in central university roles in Australia, I decided I wanted to go back to being a general academic, having enough time to do research, getting back into the classroom, and also playing service roles and engaging with industry. And I want to leave a message that it's been a very rewarding career. And I think it's not an easy time in Australia and New Zealand just now. The sector has been contracting, but it's a very diverse sector. And I want you all to think of the diversity of opportunities. I was asked, why did I decide on this career pathway? Look, really just serendipity. A company in Europe I was working for, Wigwam Holidays, had financial troubles. I got an opportunity to go back to my alma mater in Glasgow, University of Strathclyde, and I grabbed it. My career, I've gone back and forward a bit between academia and industry, but academia has always lured me back. And I certainly have no regrets about going down that path, partly because universities and higher education gives us a degree of freedom, and also they are big organizations. So through your career, you can have lots of learning opportunities, irrespective of where you are in this cycle. Now, what I would say to those embarking on a career is you need to consider the whole spectrum of teaching, research, and also of service. In my own case, I wasn't so research intensive at the beginning. These days, you really have to, for research intensive universities, be very strong, of course, on publications and grants. It was a bit different when I was going through. But to have a rewarding longer term career, I think having that balance between the different sectors, including being externally engaged to community and industry, is important. When you're going for selection panels, and I've been on many, what are they looking for? Well, each little group or within bigger universities like the one here in Texas, there's always priorities. So somehow when you're in that interview session, trying to line up, what is my story? Am I a specialist on artificial intelligence or service quality or ecotourism? How does that going to line up with the institution and the group that I want? So that alignment of branding important. Many of my appointments have been based on virtual, so including the one in Hong Kong and the one here. So I never came to the university. So you obviously need to think of that online presence to be strong. Any regrets about choices? Well, if you see this thing, choose two: good teaching evaluations, submit article, or spend time with family. False, only get one of these. I maybe could have spent more time with family sometimes during my career, a little bit obsessed as we can be in academia. So that would be the only thing I'd do differently next time around, I think. Two more slides. What pieces of advice I would give you? Well, I'm here in Bryan College Station in Texas. It's a very, very interesting community. And I've only been here 5 years, but what I would say everywhere that I've worked, Hong Kong, Australia, Glasgow, etc., try to connect with your local institution. How do they link up with all the communities around? But of course, our sector is very global. So that balance between the global and the local, I think is very critical. Just looking at my watch. Okay. Show enthusiasm for storytelling. So I'm later in my career, but for many of you earlier on, you need a story. Of course, you need publications, but if you're enthusiastic, can relate it to that institution, you'll win over the panel because it's about hearts as well as minds. It's not just the tangible. And then the third thing I'd say is cherish your time in higher education. Not all PhD graduates will work as academics. They may go to other sectors. They may not have the chance because tenured positions are quite limited. But the time you have either as a researcher, a teacher, or doing service is very rewarding. And in my own career, my university in Australia had TAFE as well as higher education. So look at the vocational side, look at the private sector as well as the highest tier universities. Last slide coming up. My final piece of advice would be, I'm in my later career, I've just moved to this campus in Texas. There's our on-campus hotel, a huge campus, and it's very exciting to do something different later in career. So I'd encourage you all at the beginning of your career, imagine you're going to make many changes, but higher education, great opportunities, I think. Oh, back to you, Rawan. Thank you.
Perfect in timing. Thank you, Professor Brian. Thank you. So I just want to encourage everyone to send your questions, not in the chat box here on Zoom, but on the conference live session. Just if you can please add your questions there. So I'm going to move on now to Dr. Natasha. Welcome, Natasha. And I'm just going to time you, and you may start now.
Okay, let's go. Thank you so much. And first, I would just like to acknowledge the traditional owners, the Yagara and Turrbal people here in Brisbane, and acknowledge traditional owners across the lands where everyone's meeting today, and also extend my thanks to the Corthy committee for putting me on today's panel. I remember heading over across the bridge here to the Sofitel in Brisbane for my first PhD Corthy session. So to be on the other side of it today is really exciting, a great opportunity, and a great opportunity for me to reflect on where I've been since my PhD as well. So thank you for this opportunity. So my career journey since I finished my PhD, what is now I think 7 years ago, and it's flown by. As soon as I finished my PhD, I started looking for industry-based jobs. I knew as I was going through my PhD that academic writing wasn't quite for me, but that I enjoyed the practical side of things a lot more than I enjoyed the writing academic papers. So I started looking for tourism-related jobs and jumped straight into something. Was it a reasoned, rational choice? No, it was the first job that I found who wanted to employ me once I was finished with my PhD. So that sounded like a great opportunity at the time. Should have noticed the red flags when I got into the interview, and my potential employer asked me whether my values aligned with the organization. So the company was a tourism and hospitality consulting firm, and they did a lot of work with gambling companies. So they did a lot of work to get betting machines poker machines into clubs and hotels. It was a lot of work on community impact analysis and a lot of research into community impact of gambling for the positives to try and get the pokies into machines. At the time, I didn't think that my values really impacted my work that greatly. So I just kind of shrugged it off and said, no, that's all good. I'm happy to put my values aside and I'll work for you. So I dove in head first. I was undervalued at that place. I jumped in on quite a low salary, a low graduate starting salary for a graduate who would have just come out of a bachelor degree. But I dove straight in thinking that I would work my way up and that it would all turn out rosy in the end. In hindsight, that wasn't the case, but I spent 6 months working and understanding what my values mean to me and how important it is to find employment that does actually genuinely mean something and align with your ethics and values. And also how important it is to find an employer who values your skills and what you can bring to the table as you go through your employment as well. As I handed in my resignation, they offered me everything that they possibly could to keep me. So what started as an incredibly low wage tripled by the time that I was leaving, and that still was not enough to keep me there. I still have a really good relationship with that employer. It was nothing against the people. They still speak to me on a regular basis. They were wonderful people, but the type of work that they were doing just didn't sit well with me at the end. So moving forward to there, I was lucky enough to apply for a job at the Queensland Tourism Industry Council. And it was there that I found a job that truly did align with the values that I was looking for and a passion that I had for the tourism industry. So the Tourism Industry Council acts as the voice of tourism. And so I was able to put my PhD into practice every day that I worked there. I knew that my boss had a genuine heart and wanted to do the best for the tourism industry, and I knew that I wasn't compromising what I wanted to achieve from my career path through going through that process. I also knew that my employer valued research, that he allowed me to push back and challenge his decision, and that my curious mind was well accepted within my organization. And that's something that really built over time. I knew that I got a lot of trust from my organization. That was something that was earned over time and something that I really value in both my work with the Queensland Tourism Industry Council and my work now with EarthCheck. I'm incredibly trusted in my position, which means I have a lot of freedom to build my role into what I want. As I went through my time at QSIC, I got the opportunity to go through the QSIC mentoring program. And I was matched up with a senior tourism professional who told me, as I was questioning whether or not I should stay with QSIC for a little bit longer, that I should evolve my role into the position that I want it to be. And that was the biggest piece of advice that I could have. And that kept me into my position for another 18 months. I evolved my role and I pushed the boundaries of what I could do within my position. I made it to what I wanted. I challenged myself every day and I pushed and I expanded the position that I had and turned it into something quite exciting and something that I wanted to get out of bed for every single day of the week. And I think that was really exciting for me. How did I decide on my pathway? Brian, you called it serendipity. I just call mine dumb luck. I stumbled into my roles. I stumbled into my positions. I wish that I had planned more. I wish that during my PhD, I had put the time and effort into exploring the positions and the organizations that I wanted to work in when I moved forward. Looking back on it now, it would have been sensible to build the relationships that I wanted when I graduated, so that when I came into industry, that I had those networks and I had the strength to move into the roles that I wanted. But hindsight's a great thing. I've ended up in a great position now, and I'm really happy that I have ended up in the position that I'm in. But my pieces of advice would be to build those relationships as you go through your PhD. If you're looking to work in your area or a field of research, you're using interviews, you're connecting with industry, then maintain those relationships, build them, foster the networks, go to industry-based networking events when they're face-to-face again, meet people, engage with people and build those relationships so you've got the pathways that you want when you move forward. Target employers who align with your own ethics and values, and make sure that you're doing something that you want to get out of bed for in the morning. And make sure that you value your worth as well. As PhD candidates, you've obviously got curious minds, you've got intelligence, you've got strong research. You mentioned grants there, Brian. That was one thing that I, again, didn't like doing in the academic world, but hey, that's one of my main parts of my jobs now. And it's a skill that most people don't have. So taking those research skills, the writing skills that you have, and applying them in the practical sense as well is really important. So they would be my piece of advice. Use those relationships that you've got, build them, foster them, target the employers that you want, and actually use your time strategically, and make sure that you're valuing your worth, because those skill sets are incredibly rare in industry. We find it incredibly challenging to recruit people who can write and who can research. So don't be afraid to reach out to companies. We would welcome any researcher to reach out to us and say either that they're looking for work, or if they've done a piece of research that would be interesting to us, we'd welcome them to come reach out and let us know what they're researching and the findings that they've had as well. So don't be afraid to reach out to companies and let them know what you've been working on and the value that your research has as well.
Thanks a lot, Natasha. Thank you for your insights. Again, another aspect that we're talking about. Now I'll move on to Associate Professor Brent. Brent, now I'll start your timing.
Thank you. Can you see the screen?
Yes, we can.
All right. Well, thank you very much for having me at the Corthy 2022 PhD ECR workshop on employability. I'm here to offer the postdoc perspective. Now, what is a postdoc? So it's a temporary position that allows a PhD to continue as a researcher, continue building those skills and experience to prepare you for an academic career. So most postdocs are at university. They weren't as popular as they were 10 or 15 years ago, but they've become quite popular now. Some of them are at not-for-profits and in government, and universities have started to realise that they can co-fund these postdoctoral positions with industry partners. So just a bit of a reflection on my career, trying to answer that question, whether it was serendipity or not. I was born in Melbourne, and I completed all my studies, Bachelor of Business and Commerce, Honours and PhD at Monash University in Victoria under Professor Betty Weiler down there, where I developed an interest in national parks and remote areas that I really carry with me to this very day. And you can see that blue line there, and I'm happy to take any questions about this blue line, because there's a 2-year gap between finishing my PhD and securing the first postdoctoral research fellowship. And that was a time where I sold everything I owned. I took that snowboard behind me. I went up the top of every mountain in Europe, snowboarded down it, and grew a big beard. I had long flowing hair at the time. You can imagine it. And I really thought about what I wanted to do in my career then. Then I got my first chance as a postdoctoral research fellow, 0.4. So 2 days a week on an ARC linkage project led by Professor Betty Weiler, where I got to work with 3 different parks agencies in 3 different states. At the end of that, I got an opportunity to secure a role as a senior research fellow at the Griffith Institute for Tourism. Very exciting time. The Institute was just starting. There was a lot of investment, a lot of momentum. Towards the end of that, I applied for and secured an Advanced Queensland Mid-Career Research Fellowship, which went for 4 years with the state government, where I actually got to sit in with an industry partner 2 weeks a month for 4 years. At the same time, I went up to University of Sunshine Coast, and I did that research fellowship contemporaneously with leadership roles up at the University of Sunshine Coast. And finally, in 2019, I got to come back to Griffith University in a permanent role. So I really had about 10 years there in postdoctoral appointments. What are the benefits of postdocs? Well, undoubtedly, it's an accelerated publication trajectory. Having that time to really focus on research without having that teaching portfolio to develop at the same time. You know, I was really able to deep dive into a number of different collaborations there, and I wouldn't have had the publication trajectory I have without moving through the postdoc scheme. The biggest one for me has been external funding, and this didn't really come at the start of the postdoctoral appointment. You know, I was working on other senior researchers projects. I got a couple of $10,000 or $20,000 grants, but in the last sort of 3 or 5 years, that's when really that funding for research and engagements really come through. Opportunities to become involved in HDR supervision and really be connected to the engine, and make no mistake about it, you guys are the engine which drives research forward at our institutions as well. Postdocs provide that opportunity for sustained engagement with industry and end users. Increasingly, our universities want us to engage with people outside the walls of academia to create an impact. And I'm in the 7th year of a program of research where I've actually lived in the outback in a house out there for 64 weeks. I wouldn't have got the research leadership opportunities without that accelerated postdoc pathway that I had at the University of Sunshine Coast. I'd never travelled overseas before my PhD. Now I've been to over 40 countries, so that was a huge advantage. But the best for last, the biggest one, has been opportunities to be mentored by research leaders in tourism across the journey. Has been absolutely massive for me and something that I value each and every day. The critical success factors, I have to say, and I've put it in red there, is get out of your office. Tourism happens out there, not necessarily in here. So you've got to go, if you're in Brisbane, you've got to go to the C-Bus building, you've got to go out to the regions, you've got to go visit all the stakeholders, you've got to talk about your project. I probably should say there's different types of postdoctoral appointments. There are postdoctoral appointments where you've been appointed to play a specific role on a project, or there's postdocs where you're driving your own independent program of research. If you want to drive your own independent program of research, get out of the office and collaborate. Work with great people in academia, but not just in academia, in industry, in government as well. Set up partnerships, set up teams, think across disciplines, think new, innovative, cutting edge ways that you can blend that theory and practice together. Within that, what is your role on a research team? Do you coordinate different projects? Are you a data rock star? You know, are you a writer? You know, what's your different role and how can you add value to these larger interdisciplinary teams and play a role in enhancing the productivity of the team? If you want to get into a postdoc, be aware of bibliometrics. They're everywhere. We're measured in everything we do these days. How many papers do you need? What do you need to demonstrate? What skills do you need to demonstrate on external projects to be an attractive candidate for a postdoc? Big one for me. Everyone talks about goals. Don't just set goals, set a vision. Where do you want to be in 2 years? Where do you want to be in 5 years? Where do you want to be in 10 years? And make your goals small, achievable goals that help you get towards your bigger vision for your career as well. Create opportunities. Don't just wait for them to come to you. Don't just wait for a postdoc to be advertised. If you've got an industry contact or somewhere where you can go to match and create funding, create those opportunities yourself. 2 of the 3 postdocs I got weren't advertised, they were created. Massive one for me. Be open to mentoring. Just because you finished your PhD, if you're a difficult person that thinks you know everything, you know, you're probably not going to succeed on the postdoc pathway. So be open to that mentoring and always mentor and pass on that goodwill that you've received down the line. Be open to criticism, welcome it, embrace it. It's from criticism that we learn and we grow. Take time to reflect as well and celebrate your achievements. Biggest one for me, fail and fail again. Create an anti-vitae. We've got a CV saying all the good things that we've done. Create a CV of your failures and learn from it and reflect as well, because that is truly how we grow. Biggest one for me has been work-life balance and burnout. I've had a young family with kids, much like Brian mentioned in the first session. You know, it's been very, very challenging to know where the limit is and to know when to stop. What I would have done differently is a bit of patience. I didn't have to have 3 careers over 10 years. I could have taken it a little bit slower. Three pieces of advice for students interested in the postdoc pathway. Carefully consider whether a postdoc is the correct option for you post-PhD. There's an enormous amount of different options for your career as well. So postdoc is only one of those options too. And within that, your career is a marathon, not a sprint. So if you are going to go into postdoc, what are you going into the postdoc for? What's it training you for in 5 or 10 years? And how can you utilize that postdoc to achieve that bigger career vision? And the biggest one, this is one of my favorite quotes, is pessimists see the difficulty in every opportunity, whereas optimists see the opportunity in every difficulty. If you're an optimist that sees opportunity in every difficulty, then perhaps the postdoc pathway is for you. Thanks, guys.
Thanks a lot, Brent. Thank you. And I really enjoyed all of the 3 presentations till now. 3 different aspects, 3 different lenses that we're talking about following the PhD. I just want to encourage all of the participants, we have already few questions, but if you can add your question now, it would be easier to moderate them later. And I'll move on to our final panelist today, Dr. Jane. So Jane, if you may start now.
Oh, thank you. So I'm just sharing my screens and I am going to assume that you can see them, but somebody tell me otherwise.
Yes, we can.
Awesome. So morning, everyone. It was really interesting hearing Natasha's presentation because a lot of it really resonated with my story as well. I attended my first Corthy conference in Adelaide back in 2011, which is when I was finishing my master's and considering moving to a PhD. So it's really nice to sort of be back 11 years later. So I did my undergraduate degree in Auckland. I did marketing and sociology, which is not really what I've ended up working in. Then I went overseas and worked as a TEFL teacher, teaching business English in Germany for almost 2 years. I came back in 2008, which was when the global financial crisis was hitting, and it was a really bad time to be trying to get your first job or your first proper job out of uni. Back to Auckland. So I ended up enrolling in an honours degree. They just started offering a sociology of tourism paper that was supposed to be a stopgap while I kept looking for a full-time job. Somehow that turned into a master's down at Otago, which turned into a PhD at UTS. And I guess the point of all that is that I was never intending to become an academic. The point was never to end up in academia. And so it wasn't really a conscious decision to leave again. So my scholarship was running out because I took longer to do my PhD than I should have done. So I was desperately looking for a job. I was applying for pretty much any research jobs going in Auckland and Wellington across New Zealand. There's not a lot of tourism academic jobs in New Zealand. So that was really a large part of why I was looking at industry. And I got offered a job at a small evaluation consultancy in Wellington. So I finished my PhD part-time while I was working there for sort of the first 2 years. Similar to Natasha in that they brought me in at what I think was probably what they would have paid a bachelor's graduate, and the same intent to sort of work my way up quicker than I would have if I was coming in on a bachelor's. It's debatable whether that happened. And then I moved from there into central government. So Wellington is obviously the capital of New Zealand. So I went to the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment as a research analyst it was a 3-month contract that got extended to 6 months, got extended to 9 months, and then to the Ministry of Transport for 3 years. So I worked as a senior evaluator there. And then in April of this year, I moved to Mudd & Jenkins, which is a private consulting company. But I think 99% of our work is for central government agencies, largely based in Wellington. So it's doing the same work, just on the other side of it. So I wanted to put this up there because I wanted to start off by dispelling a myth. It's a little bit different to the previous presentations, and that I think a large part of what I wanted to talk about just now is what my job actually involves, because it's not something that I knew or was exposed to when I was doing my PhD. I didn't know anyone who worked in policy or evaluation at the time. So someone in academia, who I won't name, but said this to me a couple of years ago, and I thought about moving into government, but I'd miss using my brain. It's a really intellectually challenging job. It's not theoretical in the same sense, but it's definitely not sort of twiddling your thumbs and just writing really are doing some hardcore analysis, hardcore writing. It's just a different type of work. So things I've worked on recently is evaluation of transport policy changes. So looking at the effects of increasing the driving age, a lot of work on reducing road deaths, working on identifying and preventing financial crime and corruption, trying to determine how to measure housing affordability in New Zealand, developing and administering a funding scheme to support essential transport connections during the COVID-19 response. So that was ensuring that planes could keep flying in and out of New Zealand and negotiating with airlines overseas and things. And I'm currently working on an evaluation of the wage subsidy scheme, which I think is similar to the JobKeeper payment in Australia. So all of this is to say that it's interesting work. It's not tourism, which is perhaps my first love, but it's still interesting work and it does take your brain. So although I don't use the content, so the tourism side of things, my day-to-day job, I definitely still use all of those skills that I acquired, which is what I wanted to talk about here. So the work that I do is essentially what you do in your PhD. So project scoping, evidence, collecting new evidence, analysing it, writing it up, presenting it, stakeholder management, project management. All of that is exactly what I do, just on a smaller basis, and it's contracted to different agencies. So they tell me what they want researched, and then that's what I do. I think people who go into academia often like a good debate, and so crafting a good argument is a very important skill to have in policy, and I think your PhD is really good at that, and same with teaching project management skills. The one that's not always obvious is around feedback. So I think PhD students are used to having their work critiqued. They're used to balancing conflicting feedback from different supervisors or different reviewers and things. And that's exactly what you do in policy. You have different ministers giving conflicting feedback and you have to negotiate those relationships. So to prepare for this presentation, I crowdsourced some ideas from a couple of other former PhDs I know who work in government. Basically took them out for coffee and picked their brains. This is the Beehive in Wellington, so New Zealand's government buildings, and around it is various different ministries. Everything's very central in Wellington, which is nice. It's all the ministries have to be walking distance to the Beehive so they can go and meet with ministers. So the three things that kept coming up in these conversations I had with other PhDs was around analytical skill and communication skills to articulate this analysis. So as PhD students, you probably all have these, right? The other one was being politically savvy, and I think this one's quite a lot harder to learn. So I don't work directly in policy, I work in the research side of things. So I'm a bit removed from this, I can be a bit more blunt. But policy is about balancing conflicting priorities. So if you spend money on X, you'll have less to spend on Y. So well, the evidence might say, for example, reduce speed limit 20k would drastically reduce road deaths. But politically, that's not palatable. And so ministers have to take that evidence and balance it with the other political lens. And like this example is a bit simplified, but that can get quite frustrating if you're coming from an evidence background and you're used to, but this is what the evidence says. And that's not always what happens. And there's also learning how to deal with ministers. So it's a whole different language. You can't just tell a minister no. It's all sort of have to play nice, which isn't necessarily how academia works. I think people are a bit more upfront. And the other one is willing to embrace new ways of doing things. So I've seen this with a few PhD, or few former PhD students that I've worked with, and how it's done in government. I refer to it as quick and dirty, and it's not how you would do it in academia. It's done within a much shorter time frame, a much shorter budget. And sometimes these big decisions are made with serious repercussions, and they're made best evidence that's available, even if that evidence is less than ideal. And again, that can sometimes be a little bit tricky to deal with when you're used to it all being a bit more, I don't know, academic. So very, very quickly, because I'm running out of time. 3 things, if you were interested in a job in government, is to learn about the machinery of government and the policy process so that you know sort of the languaging and how it all works. Getting experience writing for a non-academic audience, so blog posts, industry reports, things like that. I think my other advice was the same as what Natasha said, that if you had research findings that you think would be interesting to an industry group or to one of the ministries, they often have seminar series or research seminars. You can contact them. I'm sure they'd be very interested in hearing your findings. And finally, make sure you tailor your CV to a government audience. So I hate to break it to you all, but government don't care about publications. As Brent said, it's really, really important for a postdoc and things. But what they really want to know is that can you write? Can you analyze information? Can you present it in a way that's understandable to a government or non-academic audience? And it's just drawing those links and making it really clear to show that you do know how to do that. So I think especially if you're interested in the practical side of things rather than the theory, which is what I was, then working in government, it's really interesting work and I would recommend it. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Jan. And thank you for everyone, for our esteemed panel for sharing their insights. Now I'll move on to the questions. We have 20 minutes, so that's a good timing. I'll start with the first question. It says from Valerio, it says, how do you see the employment scenario of people from other countries in the Australian tourism industry? So I would say this is for Brent and Natasha. Is it harder to get a job while not living in the country? So Brent or Natasha or both of you.
Look, I'm happy to jump in there. So when I finished my PhD, we're in another perpetual crisis, weren't we? We're in the global financial crisis coming to the end of my PhD. And, you know, outlook was pretty bleak at universities. I don't think there was really a position sort of advertised for those 3 years. So we see tourism's obviously suffered this massive exogenous shock the last couple of years. You know, the job market's difficult at the moment, but it's a boom and bust industry. It's circular. We've just woken up to news that we're going to be reopening our borders again in March, which is extremely sort of exciting. So I'd imagine there'll be a resurgence of employments in the governments, in the industry as well, as we sort of deal with this influx of kind of visitors. I mean, after the global financial crisis, we had a massive boom time for tourism. There was quite a lot of jobs there, but that did take a few years. So I'd probably say just be patient. But there should be opportunities down the line as well. That's my perspective on it anyway.
From an industry perspective, if you're going into industry as opposed to academia, I think we've seen skill shortages across industry prior to COVID, and we know that that has been amplified during COVID as well. In terms of applying from overseas, it's challenging in terms of visa issues, but I think we're going to see some kind of policy levers being utilised to get overseas workers to come back and to start to support some of the challenges that we're seeing in our workforce. We know with opportunities coming online, the Olympics, we've got a giant building coming across the road here in South Brisbane with the Queen's Wharf precinct. There's going to be a mass amount of employment required in Brisbane in particular. I don't know where you're looking at, sorry, so I can only talk Southeast Queensland. But other opportunities, I'm sure other destinations are going to be utilising those policy levers in terms of getting employees back and building up that skilled workforce as well. That middle management and above, the skills, the research, the leadership and the communication are things that we hear time and time again are missing from people who are coming into the workforce. So if you can prove that you've got those abilities and those skills, then you're going to be ahead of the game in terms of being able to apply for those jobs in industry.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Natasha and Brent. Now I'll move on to the next question from Lucia. Thanks, Brian, for sharing your experience. Very valuable. Would you say it's better to get experience in all teaching, research, and service during our PhD, or focus on one area?
Thank you for the question, which is a good one. Look, the PhD programs in Australia are quite different from here in the United States. So, and what I experienced in Hong Kong as well. So in Hong Kong and the United States, there's quite a lot of coursework. And when I was recruiting staff at Hong Kong Polytechnic University, look, we recruited a lot from the US, and partly that was more than from Australia and New Zealand. It was the number of applicants, but also because in the course of doing a PhD, the students had acquired really quite good track record on grants, on teaching, on student evaluations, and the ones that got the jobs, honestly, were those that were able to show some industry background, maybe not a lot, but a little bit of kind of engagement. Yes, they needed the publications. They needed to show they were on track with grants, even if it was to have done some courses in grantsmanship. So they didn't have to have secured big grants, but if it's someone coming saying, I've got lots of papers, please appoint me, no, they needed the grants. With service, that's more about character, I'd say. So someone who's done a lot of voluntary work, they've maybe engaged with industry or academic associations, they've shown some initiative there, that helps build that fit with the employer that I was talking about before. So if I'm a panel and I've got someone saying, please appoint me as an assistant professor, well, honestly, these days it's so competitive at the top universities that they'll ask for everything. So they're going to ask for grantsmanship, publications, good student evaluations, plus extracurricular. They're going to ask for everyone. And look, you have to have a bit of luck, because I've been for plenty of positions where I was, did not have all of these credentials and somehow got over the line. Look, I think it's really depends on your own circumstances. Brent made a good pitch for postdocs as a pathway. If you're going down that, I think that the research component is very, very important. However, for me, as someone who's been in the sector longer term, if you really go down the postdoc track, at some stage, someone within academia is going to say, what's your teaching passion? How are you going to pass that on to the next generation? So you can't postpone having a reasonable teaching portfolio. Maybe the service side is more dispensable. So we talk about research and teaching as being the core things. I think really, unless you go down the Brent track, I think you need both for most types of institution, honestly.
Thank you. Thank you, Brian. I'll move on to the next question by Aaron. Aaron is asking, what are the structural mobilities or immobilities of moving to another city to pursue work elsewhere? Is there research to suggest that those who have moved cities become more successful in life? So I don't know, Jane, can you answer it? Brian, Natasha, like all of you have moved to other cities. Jane, if you want to unmute yourself. Yes.
Yeah, I have no idea about the research. That's the beauty of moving out of academia, is I don't have to keep up with the journals or anything anymore. I moved for a job. I think I've lived in, because I did my PhD in Sydney as well, so I think I've lived in 5 different cities in 3 countries or something. It's worked out well for me because I moved for a specific purpose. I think sometimes it's good just to move for the sake of moving as well, but I don't know if any others know anything specifically around the question he's asking.
Okay, Brian, based on your recent experience.
Obviously, I'm a bit extreme, so I certainly don't want to set myself up as a role model. Brent described, having a really good career within Australia, many in the, Brisbane area and so on. And my 2 sisters have lived all their lives in Scotland and lived very, very good lives and very fulfilling. Look, I don't think that the research would be very convincing to any of us on this, honestly. It helps if you're able to be mobile, but not all of us can be. So that's I think we need to be very open-minded about this. And if you have the opportunities to gain experiences in different places, fabulous. But if you have to stay local, tourism, hospitality, events, wonderful things happen in localities. So you can have really rich experience, public, private, voluntary, without really traveling the world. But look, for those that want to, the internet has brought Australia and New Zealand to the rest of the world. It's made it much easier. So it's worked for me, but it's not for everyone.
Okay. Natasha or Brent, would you like to add anything?
I was constrained, so my partner's got 2 young kids, so I was in Brisbane and I was staying in Brisbane. So it was hard seeing, particularly as I was graduating, jobs that would have been really exciting elsewhere, but knowing that I was here, I made the most of the opportunities that I had where I was, and that was all I could do. So yeah, make the most of what you can.
Yes. Brent, would you like to add anything?
I'm just gradually moving up the coast of Australia. So I started in Melbourne, I've gone to the Gold Coast, I've gone to Brisbane and Sunshine Coast, back to Brisbane. I'm on a journey somewhere, but I'm not quite sure yet. But I honestly think having worked at 4 different institutions and experiencing the different environments, the different people there, the different structure of the institution, I think you would develop more as a scholar and as a researcher, experiencing those different environments. So whether that's in Australia or overseas, I think experiencing different environments is probably a good thing.
Okay. Thank you, Brent. We have 8 minutes remaining. So now I'm just gonna allocate questions, just in general, not to all of you, because I wanna give all the, be able to answer all of these questions. So Angie mentioned thank you all speakers, great insights. However, it sounds that especially an academic career is difficult to manage with having a family. Do we always have to choose between family and work? What are the top 3 tips for keeping work-life balance, but still being able to find a meaningful and successful career? So, Brent?
Look, I'm certainly not somebody who's got that right over the journey. I'm divorced now with 2 kids, and I would say that a large reason for that happening is because I did get that wrong. I did have to learn not so much about, I had to learn a lot about obsessive thinking. So even when I was with the kids, I had to somehow learn how to switch my brain off, stop thinking about papers, stop thinking about the next project, and stop sort of prospecting and digging for gold. I really had to turn to sort of Eastern philosophy there, do a little bit of meditation and those types of things, so that when the kids come back into my life, I can actually, transport myself into the present and to be in their world. So, it's almost like I had to train my mind to have a bit of a switch, whereas I'm working here. And I'm with the kids here. But when I don't have the kids, I probably do some pretty serious hours so I can have some more time with the kids. And it's working now, and it's working probably the best it has over the journey, but it's not perfect.
For me today, I had to send my 2 kids to the school first day. And my son was starting high school today. So I was running around, we're moving houses, doing this. So with academia, you have to learn how to juggle different things at the same time. Yeah. Now I'm going to move on to Kevin. There's a bit of a divide between qual and quan in the academic field. Have the panel found any particular skill set more or less relevant in their careers? So who would like to answer this question? Natasha.
I'm going to give you a really horrible answer that you're going to hate, because both have been incredibly useful in the work that I do, particularly with EarthCheck. So we're an environmental consultancy firm. So we do destination management planning, we do work with risk and resilience. We do a lot of community consultation, which is qualitative all the way. So it's understanding community impact of tourism. So qualitative is huge through that perspective. But to understand that, we also need to set the scene. So we need to understand the visitor statistics. So not the hardcore quant stuff, but gentle quant, and a lot of qual in terms of understanding community impacts as well. So light quant and heavy on the qual.
Okay. Thank you, Natasha. Thank you.
Add to that as well. I'm a qualitative researcher, but definitely for government jobs, there's a lot more government research jobs in the quant area. So if you've got that quant data skills, there's a lot more jobs available.
Yeah. Okay, we have 4 minutes remaining. Christine is asking, I wonder what motivates you to be engaged in academic research. She finished her master's degree and considered to pursue a PhD degree. So is it worth it or not? And at the beginning, and what would keep you being in academia for a long time? So Brian, if you want to answer this question, should she or should she not?
So just based on my own experience, if you can have different levels of teaching, research, service, and engagement through your career, it allows you to stop for breath, focus on different things, Sometimes you're more with your little discipline group. Sometimes you're more looking at a university as an institution. You're working on other process. So for me, in my career of, it's more like 40 years in universities, that being able to change over time and have different focus is really important. Personally, small is beautiful for me. So my department here is quite small scale. I really like having a tight culture around me. So that helps to keep me motivated. But sometimes in your career, it's nice to look at universities as big institutions and just a little bit like Jane was saying on the politics, understand how government works. You get that satisfaction, and just keep the passion for next generation and also for asking questions.
Perfect. Thank you, Brian. Thank you for your insights. Now, Phoebe is saying, how much do academic panels, again, it seems it's for you, Brian, how do they take on relative to opportunity as a casual staff member and early career researcher? Getting grants, for example, is very difficult unless you have a good team working with you or more or senior staff. So what would be how can she tackle this in terms of the panels? Selection panel?
I think these days skills acquisition can be done in all sorts of ways. So either mentorship was mentioned, I think by Natasha or by Jane before, very important. So you can get people to help mentor you on grantsmanship, or you can do, MOOCs or little online courses, certifications, or most universities have grant writing. So I think there's ways of, in that interview session, you've got an answer, because we all have strengths and weaknesses. Someone who has never got a grant successfully as a PI has a weakness, but don't be floored when someone asks you the question. So I think just working at showing that you realize that it's going to be important to you and to your employer. So just nurturing that and having a story that's compelling. That's what I'm doing.
Perfect. Thank you. Last question. You have 45 minutes, Brent, to answer it. Collaborations with government and industries is important while doing PhD. What kinds of collaborations do they need to build?
Well, look, I think you need to get out there and sit in with the industry partners that you want to work in. So throughout my career, I've sat at 3 different parks agencies. I sat at EarthCheck for about 4 or 6 months. I've sat out at regional councils. One of them I've spent 64 weeks sitting out there. So you've got to go there. You've got to immerse yourself. You've got to learn the language, and you've got to see how you can be useful. And that's going to be different depending on the industry partner you're working in, the geographic context they're working in, the political environment that's occurring as well. So really the best piece of advice I sort of have is go and sit out with an industry partner while you're doing your PhD. Maybe spend a 3-month period after confirmation sitting in with an industry partner. I believe our programs in Australia should probably do a better job at connecting students with those potential partners they can sit in after confirmation as well. And, for me, everything that I've learned about working for industry has come from spending time embedded and engaged with those different partners. It's only then I've worked out how it can be useful. And, even after that, research comes a bit later.
Brent, thank you so much. We have 10 seconds. Thank you so much for our participants. Thank you for our panel. And we'll see you in the following sessions. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
See you guys.
Bye.
Thanks, Rawan. Thanks, everyone.
You're welcome.
Thank you.